Winter is coming to an end, so I apologize now for bringing up snowballs and avalanches, but there's also no better time than now to get out of debt. Jackie Beck is the creator of the App Store hit Pay Off Debt by Jackie Beck, which has helped over 53,000 people break free from debt. Today on the show, Jackie shares her story and explains the difference between the debt snowball and the debt avalanche, and which one might be best for you to finally conquer your debt. Welcome to the MapleMoney Show, the podcast that helps Canadians improve their personal finances to create lasting financial freedom. Today's sponsor is Wealthsimple. With no fees on deposits and withdrawals and higher interest rates than the big banks, smart savings is a better way to save. You can find out more about Wealthsimple at maplemoney.com/wealthsimple. Now let's chat with Jackie about paying off debt. Hi, Jackie. Welcome to the Maple Money Show.
Hey, how are you doing?
Great. So I know a while ago, we'll get into this soon, but you paid off a lot of debt, and you've kind of focused a lot on paying off debt since then on your blog. Can we just hop right into it? And can you kind of just tell us about your debt story?
Sure. Well, my debt story is kind of long. I basically started out like a normal person, just getting into debt, thinking that was the normal way to do things. Like, if you buy a car, you take out a loan, you go to school. I did go to undergraduate school without taking out a loan, but then for graduate school, I did. And, you buy a house, take out a loan. It seems like the typical way to do things. And also we had the credit card issues. I originally got a credit card and it was supposed to be just for emergencies. But eventually things like pizza became an emergency. It just really got out of hand. And I did try very hard to get out of debt for a long time, unsuccessfully. But finally, I figured it out. And what actually helped was losing my job. I was unemployed for about 4 years. And so I learned how to live on basically nothing. And when I finally got a job again, it was like a part-time job. I was so excited to be having any money. I felt super rich. And I'm like, I am going to pay off my student loan because I never want to be in this situation again. Yeah. So I just kept living on basically nothing. And I'm really not exaggerating either. I had like $400 a month in income and paid off my student loan in like 5 months after having it hang around for over 10 years. So that really got me excited. And my husband got excited too about the idea of getting out of debt. And he thought, well, maybe he would pay off his car. And so it just kind of went from there. We just kept paying off one thing after the other. And we sort of accidentally used the debt snowball because I hadn't heard of it, but that is actually what we did. We started with one debt, moved on to the next one, kept adding, the payment we had been paying to the next one. And eventually we got to the point where we're like, hey, why don't we pay off our house? And I remember my husband saying, okay, well, that sounds great, but how are we going to do that? And I was like, well, I don't know, but let's just do it. Let's just start by sending in some extra money. And we actually started by sending an extra $35 a month. And then once we really started to focus on it, at one point, I think we sent in $8,000 in 1 month. It just, we both got better jobs. We worked extra. We had side hustles. I started, had the blog. And it just really increased from there more and more. And so we ended up paying off our house in about 3.5 years. Wow. So it was really nice. So I'm super glad to be out of debt. I never want to be in that position again. And it is so great to be free to do the things that you really love to do.
Well, congrats on that. I still have a mortgage, a very sizable mortgage, but I kind of go on the idea that that's good debt, depending on whether or not you can truly afford it. Some people go too much on the idea of good debt, and they buy too much house or more house than they can afford, and that so yeah, I don't want to use it as a crutch kind of thing, but it's certainly better than credit cards and all that.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, the whole good debt, bad
Yeah,
debt thing. So I think that there's just debt. It's all risky.
yeah.
So it just depends how much risk you want to take, really, what
Well,
you feel
and
comfortable with.
even more so here in Canada, mortgage interest isn't tax deductible. So it's even less of a good debt than it can be considered in the States. Here we're paying that interest and obviously principal, and there's no tax benefit at all to help kind of offset that a bit.
Yeah, there's actually not for a lot of Americans either, because even
Oh, okay.
though it can be tax deductible, that's only if you itemize, and the vast majority of people do not itemize.
Fair enough. Okay.
So,
Now you mentioned the debt snowball. Can you kind of go into that? I know there's a debt snowball and a debt avalanche. Can you kind of explain both of them, why they're different?
well, in a sense, they are kind of the same. They have the same basic idea. You pay off the debts in order, and each time you finish paying off one debt, you put the money that you had been sending to that debt towards the next debt. So over time, the amount you're sending towards debt gets larger and larger. So, but the main difference, though, is that with a debt snowball, you put your debts in order from lowest balance to highest balance, and it's regardless of interest rate. And with the debt avalanche, usually people put it in order from highest interest rate to lowest interest rate,
Yeah.
no matter what the balance is. So it one is more mathy and the other one is more emotional. But it's also, I think the debt snowball is much more motivating because if you are in debt, this maybe sounds terrible, but you're not. I certainly wasn't. You're not making the most rational choice necessarily anyway, because why would you choose to pay interest? You know, you're paying extra for everything you own. That's not super rational. Um, but most people don't think of it that way. I didn't, but it's true. So I think if you stick with the debt snowball, then you're more likely to actually stick with getting out of debt. So
Okay.
it kind of depends how you got into debt, which one makes more sense to use.
Yeah, much like you said, you did the debt snowball by accident before knowing what it was. I did the debt avalanche, being so numbers based in my life. All I could see was this costs more, and in a way, to me, that was the motivating thing. It was better to pay off a debt that was in double digit interest than it was to pay off maybe a credit line that was single digits.
Yeah.
But I totally get the idea that for the majority of people, the debt snowball is probably a better way to go because they're not as number focused. so I often suggest that. I just didn't do that myself just because of my mindset.
Yeah. And it also depends on the actual debts that you have, because sometimes, like, I've run the numbers for a lot of different people just because they've contacted me, and it's sometimes it's only like a month or two difference, whichever way you do. It really depends on the interest rates of your debts and the balances. So it can vary a lot.
Yeah, fair enough. The biggest point is to get to that end state, right?
Right. Exactly. Stick with it until you're done.
That's where the real savings is when it's zero.
Yeah.
So I mentioned my debt a bit. So and I mentioned on the show before, but one of my biggest issues was say I'm spending on a credit card and I would pay off the credit card with the credit line and I would pay off the credit line, but it became this constant cycle where it's like I had this habit of paying debt, but I didn't necessarily have this habit of stopping at all. It was just this bad cycle of the debt never got too high, but I was constantly sort of borrowing and paying it off. I'd like your thoughts on that, and I think this probably goes along with your debt mindset reset. If you can go into that as well.
Yeah, that's super common. A lot of people do pay off one debt by borrowing somewhere else. So
Yeah.
really, they're kind of moving it around. But at least in your case, you were paying where you had moved it from, too. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is if you want to get out of debt, you have to stop borrowing. That's the number one thing, and it's actually something that so many people don't do because, like, they'll have an emergency come up, or just something that they forgot. Like for some reason, I would forget to pay my car tags every year. Like I would forget that they were due. And then here's the surprise bill that happens every single year. And it's like,
Surprise.
somehow it was always a surprise. But you have to be able to stop borrowing. And that means actually building an emergency fund and changing the way you think. And that's where the whole debt mindset reset comes in. Because it's really about, you have to think differently. You have to think, okay, so I'm only going to spend money that I already have. And that's one thing. A lot of people feel like you have to be frugal to get out of debt. And I am not remotely frugal, really. But what you really have to do is only spend money you already have. You have to stop borrowing. And then you have to keep making those payments and obviously pay extra towards your debt to get it paid off faster. And so the Debt Mindset Reset is a little email course. It's free. And it just goes into that in more detail and talks about changing, really the way you think and then the things you do.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned sort of this idea of no longer borrowing. So now that you're debt free, what's your opinion on credit cards? I'm kind of a fan of them as a tool, but again, I realize that doesn't work for everybody. So, where are you at with that personally? Do you use credit cards, or do you swear off all debt completely?
Well, I did not use credit cards for many years. Actually, I cut them all up. Actually, when I got divorced from my first husband, they all got closed. The accounts all got closed, and I never reopened them for many years. And then eventually I did reopen one after I had an incident with my bank from my debit card that just was not pretty. So since then I have used them and I just pay them off right away as soon as I get the bills. So actually beforehand, I have them set up to auto pay from my checking account. So they're paid right away. I don't think that credit cards are like evil or bad, although they can be bad. It depends on you. I mean,
Yeah.
for many years, I didn't use them because yes, they're a tool, but so is a chainsaw. And if you don't know how to use it, you can get hurt. So you might want to, you got to be careful. And if you find yourself constantly bleeding, that's a sign that this is not for you. So it just depends on your situation.
And that's why I don't have a chainsaw.
That's right. Power tools are scary, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's great because there's loads of benefits to a credit card, but yeah, it is a dangerous thing if you treat that like free money. Like again, I've said on the show before, but credit cards were my problem early on. I thought it was free money. I was just too young, and you get a credit card, and when you barely even had a job before, that's a lot of new money that you didn't have access to.
Yeah, it's especially bad if you don't feel. That is another thing that's bad if you don't feel the pain. If it feels like, oh hey, here's all this, like you said, free money, no big deal, I can get whatever I want. That's not a good thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I honestly I can even catch myself doing that now sometimes. I'm a natural spender, but I do keep myself in check. But you're right. There's not a lot of pain when you pull out a credit card, and nowadays you just tap them even, and it's a little too easy.
Yeah, there's a reason for that.
Real money. Yeah, so I get it, and thankfully I've been able to sort of keep that under control. If I was out of control, I'd be spending like crazy because it's something that's sort of still in me naturally, but I just fight those urges because I don't want to be in debt anyway ever again. So say someone wants to pay off all this debt. What's your thoughts about sort of organizing it? Not so much with debt, but in the past I've found even just something like bills in general. There's just so much going on, and if you have multiple debts and you're paying an interest payment here and an interest in principal over there, and how do you kind of get this all organized? Do you just sit down with all your different statements, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would sit down with all your statements and set up your debt snowball or debt avalanche or debt whatever. Set up your plan, and then also just like monthly, I actually automated all the minimum payments for everything, from my checking account, just automate it. And then you don't have to worry about that. And then the one you're focusing on, then you can sit down like every time you get paid or every time you make some extra money or both, and send in money towards that debt to reduce the balance. So it's that way you get to feel, it's all taken care of at a minimum, but you also get to feel like excited that you're making this progress. I've sent this extra money in. Oh, I feel, and really go ahead and feel good. I used to like be excited when I sent an extra $5 in. It every little bit helps. So, use those times to like celebrate and stay focused.
Yeah. And I like the idea of automating the minimum payments. My when I was paying off debt, one of the problems I had was I missed a payment. It's just because I couldn't keep track of it. Like I said, I was paying off one debt with another debt and then paying off that debt. So it becomes this weird juggling game. But thankfully I didn't miss it by a lot. Like at least here in Canada, I don't know if it's exactly the same in the States. If you're within 30 days, it's not necessarily a huge problem on your credit score. But I was able to pay within that time. It wasn't even a lack of money. It was just a lack of organization.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a reason I still, even now I have all any bills that I do have, like the electricity, it's all automated because I have ADD and I'm like, I know I'm not going to remember that stuff. So I don't have to remember it. I just make sure I check the statement every time it comes in and make sure it really did get paid. But that way I don't have to realize it's been 6 weeks since the electric bill sat on my desk. So it just automating is really good for that.
Yeah. One thing I've been doing, whether it's the credit card bills or just bills in general, again, is I've been making sure to review everything every 2 weeks. I used to kind of do this monthly, sit down and pay the bills, and anything that wasn't automated, and it became a problem because if you miss something and you're off by a whole month, that's too much. So every 2 weeks I kind of sit down and review everything. It's like, has there been a payment? Even the automated stuff, I don't fully trust everything to actually happen. So yeah, every 2 weeks I review all the different bills of any sort, just to make sure that it came out of this account, it went to there, everything's good.
Yeah, that's definitely smart.
Now, you mentioned saving up for an emergency fund. When do you suggest to do that? Do you do that before paying off debt? Do you do that during, after?
Well, if you don't have an emergency fund at all, I would do that first. Okay. For sure. At least a small one, whatever. I would say to make building an emergency fund an emergency, because something is going to happen. It happens to everybody. Everybody has emergencies. And if you don't have that fund, then you're in trouble. A lot of times what happens is people build up a small emergency fund and then they have an emergency and then they feel terrible that they used their money, or worse, they don't want to use it. So they borrow it. And I'm like, you need to stay focused on your goal. If you want to get out of debt, no more borrowing. And even if you have to use that fund, you're still further ahead than you would have been otherwise. So just rebuild it. But definitely start with a small emergency fund and then focus on debt, and then build a bigger emergency fund. Unless you can see like an emergency looming on the horizon. Like the first emergency fund that I built was actually about 6 months before I lost my job. I could see the writing on the wall that this business was going to close, or be sold, more likely. And I felt, like I really needed a fund. So I got a second job and built one. And then I would have been in big trouble without that. So it really makes a big difference. So that's why I say to do that first.
Yeah, that sounds great. It stops you from that cycle of debt like I was in, where something's always coming up. So you're always still borrowing, but then paying it off. And you're always one step behind and paying all the interest along the way.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if something always comes up, which it does, realize that it's not unusual. So you need to start putting those things that come up into your budget so that it's not a surprise when your car tags come due, things like that.
What are your thoughts on, and maybe this is another mindset thing, keeping the credit open? I can see some positives where having that available credit room is
good for your credit score. And it kind of acts as another emergency fund. I know that's not a great option, but what are your thoughts of that versus the mindset of some people are probably just better off to close it?
I think I wouldn't look at it as a backup. Personally, I never borrow money again. I mean, the only thing I would borrow money for ever again, is if like it was literally the only way to save my life or my family. That's it. Like literally dying.
Yeah.
But which I hope never happens. But I think, if you're worried about your credit score, you're really worried about being able to borrow again. So if you want to stay out of debt, I wouldn't worry about that. People also act like it can be the end of the world if you close a credit card, or God forbid, all your credit cards. Well, I closed every single one of mine and nothing terrible happened. It's not the end of the world the way people make it out to be. So I think you just have to do what you want to do with your life. I mean, if you want to go back into debt, sure, then worry about it. But if you don't, it's not a big deal, really.
Yeah, I've had people ask me even, they've got credit cards with annual fees, and they say, I'm not even using it. I'm paying the annual fee. I'm worried if closing it would hurt my credit score. And yeah, I've said basically that. It's like, well, that's a real number. Like if you're paying $100 a year for an annual fee, like what? That's a given. You can save that by not having that card anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, doing anything related to money can hurt or help your credit score. I mean, it's not the giant thing people need to worry about so much. I mean, sometimes people say, well, you need a high credit score so that you don't have to pay so much in car insurance, because car insurance companies will use your credit score somehow to determine your ratings sometimes. But it's like, yeah, but all the money you're saving by not having debt is going to really offset that. So I'm not terribly worried about that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I do like having a good credit score. It's one of those things I just like to feel like I'm gaming, and but you can have a great credit score just by using a credit card responsibly. Like you never really have a debt. Like you've got that money. You're just using it as a form of payment only, so that you can pay it off in full every month.
And you don't have to carry a balance on your credit card.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah. I've never had, well, never recently, actually probably ever had a credit card balance. So even when I was at my worst, I knew that it was better sitting on the line of credit than on a credit card. So, yeah, even at my worst, I knew the numbers of it, that credit card debt's the worst of them all. Well, payday loans, but I won't even get into that. So one more thing I wanted to go over with you is you have an app, the Payoff Debt app. Normally we do this at the end of the show, but we're getting near there anyway. But I'd like you to specifically go over this app just so you can kind of explain how it can help people do a lot of this.
Sure. Well, it's called Payoff Debt by Jackie Beck. If you're looking for it, you have to put my name in there too, because apparently it's not good to have your app named a keyword phrase.
Yeah, there's probably 20 of them.
Right. But it's for iPhone and Android, and it lets you decide, how you want to pay off your debts. You can put them in there, and then you put in your balance, your interest rate, the minimum payment, and then you can organize the debts in the order that you want to pay them off. It's set up to use the debt Snowball by default, but you can change it to use highest interest rate first, or you can rearrange the debts manually into whatever order you want. So like some people owe their parents money or something, and they really want to pay that off first. So you can put it however you like, and it will show you how long it takes to pay off each individual debt, and then how long till you're completely debt free. And you can add an additional payment amount, and then it turn the Snowball on or off, whatever. You can see how long it takes all these different ways. So it's a super easy way to compare the different methods. And also the main thing is that it really helps you stay motivated because you've got it right there with you all the time. So you can sit there and think, okay, so if I send in an extra $20, what kind of difference will that make? And it's just nice to be able to look at it often, because you want to keep getting out of debt top of mind and really celebrate your progress. There's also a little section in there where you can add a picture. So like if you want to like get out of debt, so you can start a family, or you want to buy a house or whatever, you can put a picture of your reason for getting out of debt, because I think it's super important to keep focused on that, because it's going to be tough. I mean, everybody has setbacks. Everyone tries to get out of debt. It's perfectly normal, and you need to really stay focused on why you're doing that. So the app really helps with that too. Also, just a little note, the icon says paid instead of the name of the app. And that's because I want people to look at that and think about how great it's going to feel when their debt is paid off. So it's all about staying motivated.
That sounds great. I wish I had something like that when I was paying off my debts. I was impressed enough that I was able to, at the time, was able to put a spreadsheet together that just to keep track of everything. Well, thanks for being on the show. Can you tell everybody where they can find you online?
Sure. My website is jackiebeck.com, and I'm on most of the social media at Real Jackie Beck.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks to Jackie for her thoughts on becoming debt-free. You can find the show notes for this episode at MapleMoney.com/Jackie Beck. Are you listening on iTunes? You can really help me out by leaving a rating and review in your app. I love the feedback, and the ratings help others decide if the show is worth their time. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.